Hi, I'm Andy Powell. Welcome to the Purpose Project. All topics are fair game. I hope you enjoy. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal advice. We are not responsible for any losses, damages, or liabilities that may arise from the use of this podcast. This podcast is not intended to replace professional advice. The views expressed in this podcast may not be those of the host, management, or the guest. This podcast is powered by the First Amendment. John Harris Thaler.
I am here.
Nice to meet you. My name's Andy. Welcome
Nice to meet you too.
Welcome to the Purpose Project. You wrote this giant book. It's got a lot of pages. I have not had a chance to read the whole thing. I was looking through it today. But that is quite a book. So we'll get into all that and how you came to write the book and everything. But my first question about the book is this a book of evidence or is this a book of story, or is it both?
It's a book of both. I would look at it this way. Many years ago, after 9/11, when the 9/11 Commission was put together, one of the issues that we discussed, those members who were on the 9/11 Commission and the support staff, one of the issues that we discussed was how to write up the story of 9/11 as a commission report in a way that would be something that the average person could read. We didn't want this to be a Washington white paper. We didn't want it to be, just a recitation of facts. So one of the things that we all decided on doing was writing it, as a story, because 9/11, of course, is a story. Now, let's leave aside the various conspiracy theories on what did or didn't happen, but at least in terms of what the commission was discovering and what they were going to put into a writing, they wanted it to be something that people could read. So I was always very mindful of doing it that way when we did this. Normally, when my office handles an investigation, which we do a lot, we've got several going on right now, totally unrelated. At the end of the investigation, we oftentimes, for the clients, will put together a compendium that involves the documents that we found, what we discovered, interviews that we had, whatever notes, whatever evidence we came up with, and just kind of a timeline story of what we found, when we found it, and how we proceeded on it. And it's kind of a way in which we obviously justify our bill, but it's a way in which the client has kind of a detailed story of exactly what we did, why we did it, how we went from point A to B, C, D, et cetera. And we provide in some form or fashion, footnotes to the evidence so that they can tie in, the story, the narrative, with the evidence. That's what we tried to do here. This was a 4-year investigation. This had various different clients at different times because of how it emerged and grew. And so one of the things that happened, as was, one of my investigators, Jacqueline Breger, gave a presentation before the Arizona joint session of House and senators. It was a joint, committee. It was on election integrity. She did this on February 23rd of last year, of 2023. And we were literally asked to provide the presentation 3.5 days before the presentation. We were not known to anybody. We had no knowledge of any particular state representatives other than, knowing, who they were by name because, they're known. We hadn't met anybody. We hadn't met with any of them. We hadn't talked to any of them. We received a call about 3.5 days before the hearing was on a Thursday. I think it was on a Sunday. We actually got a call on a Sunday afternoon, from Liz Harris, who was a state representative at the time. And she called, and she actually didn't speak with me. She spoke with Jackie Breger. And she said, I understand that you guys, your team is working on evidence regarding election integrity. And Ms. Breger said yes. And she said, well, is that something you would be willing to present? Now, behind the scenes, there's two issues. One, for us, we have clients. And our first obligation, because we are a law office, is to the client. So if the client says we can't present anything, we can't. If the client says you can present, but we can't talk about this, this, and this, that's what we have to do. So we are beholden to the client. We are not just some independent journalistic team that gets out there and does this. We're not Project Veritas. We don't have that authority. We have to go by what clients say. So sifting through in 3.5 days what we could and couldn't say, what we could and could not present, because of the effects on a client, actually in this case 2 clients, was extraordinarily difficult. We have to go over everything with them and make sure that we have written permission to proceed. So we put together as best as we could in a very short period of time, a presentation that was roughly about 30 minutes long, a speaking presentation, along with, because we didn't have time to put together any kind of a PowerPoint, we put together with that about 90 pages of documents, give or take, which were the very bare bones basics, and were really there not so much as evidence per se, but as referrals, so that when something was being referred to in the talk, in the oral presentation, Ms. Brager could refer to the the specific documents, or make sure that the legislature had those specific documents that they could look at after the fact. Then at the end, what Ms. Brager said to them very clearly, she said, look, we just got this gig. We didn't have any time to put together anything greater than this. But we have looked at at this point, we reviewed over 150,000 pages, which by the way, is over 200,000 pages of documents and evidence. We have forensic reports. We have over 1,500 pages, for example, of forensic question documents, examiner reports, examining handwriting.
And this is all into election integrity, not just in Arizona?
It's into election integrity. It's into the entirety of what we were looking at, which is the racketeering, the bribery, the corruption, which all leads into the election integrity, because it all essentially in the end is one issue.
And it didn't start as election integrity issue.
It didn't, and I'll get to that in a second.
Right.
What she said then was, at any time that any member of this legislature, any of the members of the committee, any other members of the legislature want to contact us, want to review evidence with us, we are happy to sit down with anybody and review evidence. We have a ton of it, most of which there's no way to present in this forum in this period of time. And then what happens after that, other than kind of chaos fills the room, is nobody wants to call. So to this date, with one exception, and I won't name the legislator who did so, one of them did reach out to me and has contacted me and has gone over evidence. Other than the one exception, not a single legislator, not a single member of a police department, not a single member of a sheriff's department, not the attorney general's office, not one has ever reached out and said, could we review any of the evidence?
Not the FBI?
Well, the FBI is a different issue, and I'll talk about that in a second. What we then did is I was already working, and I started working on this book a year ago, September. So late September of 2022 is when the writing began on the book. And there was not much that we were doing at that point on election integrity. That was certainly an issue. We did have very specific information and documents for 2020, but that was as far as it was going. Then what happens is you have the November 2022 election, which is where Kari Lake loses to Katie Hobbs, and where Abe Hamadeh loses for his race for attorney general. And we wind up in this interesting position where we have a pretty good idea of why this is happening because of what we had done. Now, we had no idea, obviously, the elections were going to be defrauded in November 2022. But we immediately got calls afterwards, after the election, I think within 2 or 3 weeks, from people within the Lake campaign and from others, including Mark Fincham, who had been a candidate for at that point for Secretary of State, and had previously served in, I believe, as a state senator. So we got calls from others, asking us about election integrity. So in the middle of putting together this compendium book, which was probably going to be seen at that point by 100 people at most, because the idea was, again, this was what we were working on more for the clients than for anyone else. Through that, we wound up in this election integrity situation. And of course, we did then shift focus for the next couple of months into that. So when we were called about this in February 2023, we had we had pretty good idea of election integrity, but it was not the initial focus. The original focus on this investigation started in 2019. It actually originally came about because of materials that I had found in 2018, which were a number of falsified trust deeds, warranty deeds, etc. And by falsified, I mean there's all sorts of problems with the deeds, and it's kind of a mix and match of what's wrong. But these were all documents that had falsified, forged notary signatures. These are all documents that had inconsistent signatures of parties. These were all documents that had mortgage companies and sometimes also title companies and escrow companies that were put together to, in essence, to facilitate fraud. So that started in 2018. In 2019, that expanded. There's a lot of reasons why, and we can get into it, but it expanded in 2019 to include mostly payroll theft and insurance fraud. And by that, as we discussed in the book, what had happened was is that a number of several large-scale employers in Arizona had contacted my office and really me about a payroll issue. They were having issues where the payroll numbers when they were doing audits didn't match up. Now, let me explain a little bit about this because it gets a little complicated and I want to try to make it simple. The book tries to do that, and that's one of the purposes of the book. Let's start with this. When somebody is going to be employed by a large-scale employer, and I mean an employer who employs about 10,000 people or more, there's usually, there's almost always an HR department, a human resource department that handles all of this. So you might meet, and normally you would meet, with whoever you're going to be working for, whoever your boss is going to be wants to meet you and make sure you're an okay person. But most of this goes through the human resources department. You fill out an application usually. You put down a whole lot of information about yourself. They maybe run a background check depending on the position. And then if they like you, they call you in, you meet with the senior person, who's going to be your boss, and they meet you and they say, you're great. And that's the end of it. Now, for anybody making generally under $40,000 a year, and this varies from state to state and from company to company, but almost anybody making under $40,000 a year, when both the internal auditors and the outside auditors, I mean outside auditors like PricewaterhouseCoopers, when both internal and external auditors come in and audit the books and records to make sure there's no fraud going on, they generally will overlook anyone earning under $40,000. So what happens is that they'll look at salaries and bonuses and expense accounts and things like this for workers who are in the executive pool. But for the everyday worker, they don't do it normally because there's no reason to. It's not worth the cost of the audit. So generally speaking, you can put a phantom employee, if you worked in the HR department, you could actually put into the computer system a fake employee, somebody who doesn't exist. Just put in a name, a social security number, even fill out a phony application for them, put them in a clerical position somewhere, have them make about $30,000 a year, and nobody would ever be the wiser. As long as that money is being EFT'd to a bank account somewhere, nobody would ever know that that person didn't exist. That's how easy this is. In fact, we used to have a joke about this years ago. When I did a lot of work, in California and for Universal Studios, if you were a vendor for Universal Studios and you were on the fast track payment system, meaning that your bills would get paid within about 2 weeks of submission, you could submit a bill as long as the bill was under $3,000 a month. You could continually submit this bill and get paid, and Universal would never know they were paying you, because the amount of money, which would be about $36,000 a year, would fall below the audit requirements. So the audit would never pick up the payment. So they would just think that they're paying somebody legitimately $36,000 a year. So this is not a new problem. And it's a big struggle for companies to figure out how to deal with this, because again, unless you're going to audit these things, there's nobody who's ever going to figure out that this is a problem. You're employing over 10,000 people. It doesn't show up. It's really that simple. So what had happened was that one company, which was a healthcare company, had done some bigger audits, more than just the traditional audits, and found that their payroll numbers weren't adding up. But they couldn't figure out why, because again, if you've got a name and you've got a social security number and you've got bank accounts and you've got a file, kind of a weird thing. If you got a file, people believe there's a person. So they couldn't figure out how this was going on. So that's one of the first things we were looking into in 2019 was the payroll theft. Now, what we found was going with the payroll theft was not only were phantom individuals, or fake individuals being placed within the computer systems, but those fake individuals would wind up applying for insurance. Most people know that, if you work for a large scale employer, you get a lot of benefits. One of those things is oftentimes life insurance. And usually, if you want 1 times your annual salary, so if you're making $30,000 and you want a $30,000 policy, usually that's included as a benefit in your benefits package. But if you want more than that, if you want 60,000 or 100,000 or 200,000, generally you have to pay for that, but you get to pay for it out of your paycheck, and it's pre-tax, so it's a good deal. You get to pay that pre-tax. However, there is no medical examination. There is no qualifying, because it's a group plan and you are an employee. So what we were finding was not only were the phantom individuals taking money and the payments going into Wells Fargo bank accounts, that were in their name, but we also found that they were signing up not just for the regular insurance, but usually after the first year, they were upping the insurance to the maximum amount allowed under the group policy, which could be anywhere between 5 and 10 times the annual salary. In one particular case, which involved MetLife, there was a phantom who had signed up for 9 times. And basically what was then going on was, after about 3 or 4 years of taking the paychecks minus the deductions for the life insurance, the phantom employee would die. Always of natural causes, always at home, always the body being cremated. And then a phantom husband would file the claim of benefits form and would collect the benefits. And in one particular case with MetLife was paid out on a claim until we stopped them. We actually stopped them from doing so. Was paying out $375,000 off of a $40,000 a year employee.
That wasn't even real.
Who wasn't even real.
Wow.
Okay. So that's what we were charged with looking at, and that's where it started. From there, one of the things that we were finding because we knew about the deed problem, we knew about the money laundering problem, we knew about the falsifications with notaries and parties and stuff like that. We were finding that signatures on the employment applications and on the initial application for insurance benefits, the original insurance application, matched a number of the other signatures we were seeing on the property frauds. So we were able to match the individuals up who were involved in these to be able to determine that it wasn't a singular scheme, that these things were interconnected schemes. And that led us to the access lien scheme, which is a Medicaid fraud that has cost the state of Arizona now probably over $150 million. We found other insurance frauds in there. We've of course found the computer hacking that we've talked about, and a whole number of other things. But we found this was being done by in essence what was not that large of a criminal group that was involved in multiple schemes. And so one of the things we do in the book is we talk about all of this, where we start off at the first section of the book and we explain to you what this is about. So we tell you about the state of Arizona. There are some things about the state of Arizona that make it unique in why this fraud has been so easily perpetrated there. We talk about that. We talk about some of the structural issues. And then we talk about what the overall is. What's racketeering, what's money laundering, what's corruption and bribery and fraud and insurance fraud. And we tell you, we give you some examples of exactly what we found, so you have some idea of what the overall is. Sections 2 and 3 of the book really cover both my background and investigations starting roughly about 2010 that led to this one beginning in 2019, but also the personal story behind all of this, about how I got involved, what we did. And it talks also a lot about investigative techniques, how we investigated, how we found things out, what we found, when we found it, what it then led us to, so that people can see the path. We didn't just pull stuff out and say, oh, look, this is interesting, this is a fraud. We want people to understand the story so that they know how we went through this process. I also talk a lot in the book about investigative technique and what we can find and what we can't find, and what's available and what's not available, so that people can understand what it is exactly we do. I think one of the reviews of the book said something about that, where they said, one of the things is that I provide so much evidence here that you can actually go and look at it. You can replicate our results. which is, fairly important. When you're writing it for the public, when you're writing for the client, it's not that big a deal. When you're writing it for the public, it's very important that people can take what we've done and look it up for themselves and see the exact same thing. It's like any other experiment that you might do. If somebody can't replicate the experiment has no value.
And the way the public could do this is because all of this is public record. Everything that you used for evidence and to compile these documents are public record, correct?
Yes and no. We also did issue subpoenas along the way for certain records. So there's other things that we did that we were able to do because of legal actions taken. We were able to subpoena certain things. That's not necessarily public record. For example, we were able to get a hold of literally about 5.5 years worth of phone records for two of the major players in this, Brittany Chavez and Donna Chavez. We have 5.5 years of their phone and text records. We were able to get those, which is something normally, it's much more difficult to get. So we actually have the call records of these two people who were directly involved in these schemes. We know exactly who they called, when they called them, who they texted, when they texted them. We know where they traveled to and where they were at any given time because the phone records show what towers their phones are hitting.
Wow.
So we have all of that. We know who the calls went to. We know who else was involved because we've got, I think, with 5.5 years, I think my recollection is something like 80,000 entries of information, and data that we went through here.
Man.
So I mean, why does it take 4 years to do this? Well, because that's what you're looking at. But we've got literally the phone bill and text history for about a 5.5 year period. So those are things you don't normally get. Mm-hmm. We were able through things from those to proceed with other documents that would otherwise be oftentimes private documents. We've had a lot of cooperation from clients on private documents and also from attorneys, in-house counsels for clients, who provided us stuff. So a lot of the stuff we provide, I mean, we do show you some of the phone records. We do show you what we're talking about. But yeah, I mean, mostly people can look at the public records and see what we're talking about. There's some stuff we don't talk about in the book because it's either confidential to the client, to a particular client, or has other areas that are being investigated or looked at that we are not prepared to make public at this point. There are still ongoing investigations from this. There's an insurance fraud that we are investigating right now that is totally outside of the state of Arizona. It has no direct connection with Arizona. However, we have found on falsified applications, we have found signatures and documents that match some of the players in the Arizona scheme. So things like that to not tip off what we have and what we're looking at, we don't provide. But the book itself, as you showed, is about 630 pages. It has over 500 footnotes in it. And the 500 footnotes refer to over 5,000 pages of documents that the public can review that are on the reporttothegovernor.com website. For the book, one of the interesting things is how do we present? I mean, this is maybe the biggest issue. How do we present all these documents to people? If we put them as part of the book, we'd have a 5,000 page book. It doesn't make any sense. Mm-hmm. So what we did was we footnote them in the book. And then we have the website reporttothegovernor.com, where at the top there's a menu, and on one of the menu items is footnotes, and you click on that and it opens up to all of the footnotes. So whatever footnote you're looking for whatever document you want to see, it ties into the footnote in the book. And what we did was we took especially the larger documents and we made them into separate PDF book format books within that. So you can actually go to your computer screen and actually flip pages, et cetera, over your computer screen as if it were a book within a book. So we try to give everybody, a really good look at what we're talking about. There are documents in the book. We do probably have, give or take about 100 documents or so that you can see specifically in the book. But we wanted everybody to see everything. We weren't hiding anything here. We weren't just showing you a page of something. We wanted you to be able to see entire documents, or at least have the references to be able to look at the entire document if you wanted to.
Now, as far as the clients, the initial 2 clients that started this whole thing that retained you to investigate their books because they couldn't find why their audit didn't match up, who were those clients? Were those corporations or companies?
Yeah, they're both corporations in this case. They're both large-scale employers. One is in the healthcare sector. One is in the defense contractor sector. Arizona obviously has a lot of both. It has a lot of healthcare, a lot of insurance, and a lot of healthcare insurance companies, as well as a lot of defense contractors. And those are generally the larger scale employees. Now it also has Intel and some other high-tech stuff, high-tech companies, but those were not in this investigation.
So to put it simply, starting at that point and then getting to the point of election integrity issues, how did that connect?
It might not have connected very easily, other than the obvious. Look, I've been working in political science and in public administration issues, since college. My degrees, my advanced degrees, are in the subject. So I can tell you things about elections and about election numbers and percentages that make sense and don't make sense. Almost anybody in the business can. And there are those who do this much better than I. I mean, someone like Karl Rove, just as an example, could tell you in about 10 seconds if there was something fraudulent in an election based on actuarial numbers and that particular county or that particular precinct. There are people who are that good at this. I am good at it. I'm not that good at it, but I can still see when things don't make any sense. When the November 2020 election came around, and Trump was obviously running for re-election against Biden, I didn't really think much of or consider much about election fraud. However, we were in this investigation, and about a month before the election, one of our investigators stumbled upon information regarding falsified ballots. And he followed up with that information and found a specific location where ballots were being falsified, where they were being stored, and then actually followed them and the cash that was involved with them directly to the main counting source, Runbeck Election Services, in Maricopa County. It's essentially in the heart of in Central Phoenix. Mm-hmm. So we actually got on film, falsified ballots, where they were coming from, who was storing them, and that they were being brought. Now, we didn't know what the purpose of the ballots were at the time. It's not like we got in there and got the boxes of these and were able to go through them. That we couldn't do. But so we didn't know what the purpose was. However, this is somebody who has provided a declaration. The declaration is one of the footnotes to the book. So you can actually read his declaration about exactly what he saw, when he saw it, where he saw it at, et cetera, et cetera. Like I said, we don't leave anything to chance here. We've got all this in. When that happened, we certainly knew there was an issue with election integrity, but that certainly didn't tell us that anybody was going to defraud the presidential election. That just told us that there were certainly ballot problems, which was not unusual to Arizona, right? And not at that point. When the night of the election, interestingly enough, the night of the election, as I was watching the results come in, I was at a house belonging to a friend of mine probably in the northwestern part of the Phoenix area. And at about 8 p.m., as the results were rolling in from the west and from Arizona, there was a knock at the door, and four squad cars of Mesa police officers. So you can imagine Mesa police officers are now way out of their jurisdiction. But 4 squad cars of Mesa police officers, decided that it was time to interrupt my election watching. And I talk about this in the book. I talk about what happened, which is they wanted to talk. I did not want to speak with them. And, an odd chase ensued involving the Mesa police, involving the squad cars, involving a helicopter, and a few other crazinesses to try to prevent me from essentially seeing the election results. Now, I've been around a long time. Very rarely does that ever happen, and certainly not out of the blue. So between the declaration we had and that we were sitting on at that point from our investigator and the activities of the Mesa police, we thought maybe this deserved a little greater investigation, which it clearly did.
up to that point, you had found corruption and found a lot of issues in the city of Mesa, including the police department.
Yes.
And
we knew it. We knew at that point, a couple of things that we knew. We knew, I mean, it's kind of sounds cliche to say it, but we knew that Mesa, the city of Mesa, Arizona, is a racketeering enterprise. We knew that for sure. We knew that the entirety of the leadership of that city was corrupt. We knew that they were falsifying documents. We knew that they were taking bribes. We knew that they were falsely arresting people who were in any way catching on to or were potentially a threat to the racketeering enterprises that they were involved in. That we knew for sure. We knew at that point that there were officers within the police department who were kind of acting as a police force within the police force. So we knew that as well. So there's a lot of things about Mesa that we knew. We knew that we were not getting any cooperation on anything from the city of Mesa at all.
So it sounds like they knew that you knew that they were corrupt and they were trying to just mess with you or disrupt you in some way.
Yeah, interestingly, earlier in the day, there was a conversation, a texting conversation, essentially, between myself and one of the people involved in the racketeering, who was not meanly texting me, but was texting information back and forth. There have been people along the way who have cooperated in the investigation. I think it's another thing to point out here is that, we don't, for obvious reasons and for safety reasons, we don't talk about all the witnesses. But in addition to the various documents that we've gotten, the expert witness reports that we get, all that kind of stuff, we've also spent a lot of time interviewing people and, essentially making friends with people. And so a number of the people directly involved in the racketeering are people who have talked to me, who have sat down with me, have talked to me, have told me their story, have told me that they are scared to death of what's gone on. They're scared for their safety. They're scared for their life. So obviously we don't write that up in the book. But, we have a lot of human intelligence on everything that we do. And we've actually reached out and called people and talked to people. We don't just write it up. We actually check it out. So earlier in the day, I was in a messaging conversation. It was actually over Facebook Messenger with a particular individual who was directly involved, a male individual who was directly involved in the corruption, directly involved in the bribery, directly involved in the money laundering, who was texting back and forth with me information regarding that and regarding some of the other players in it. I have no doubt that however it was seen, that officials in the city of Mesa saw the conversation. And, like I said, the conversation was not that deep and it wasn't all that valuable, but it certainly was getting at these issues. So I have no doubt that the city of Mesa had seen that, and that's what prompted the little visit. I mean, you have to put it this way. There was nobody, including anybody in the city of Mesa, who would have known where I was. It wasn't some big secret, but they just wouldn't have even known where I was. So in order to even find me that night, they had to run a trace on my cell phone. It was the only way they could physically know where I was at. They had no other way of knowing. So that's how badly they wanted to stop me from watching the election, from seeing what was going on. This is kind of one of those things where the cover-up oftentimes is worse than the crime. You've heard that adage. That's what was going on here. I probably would not have given this a whole lot of thought, except for the cover-up being at this point worse than the crime. And at that point, certainly, we expanded what we were looking at to the election. Now, one of the other reasons for that was something totally unrelated, and that was by 2020, we were fairly sure, and now we are 100% sure, that there's infiltration into the Maricopa County database. Unlike other cities and counties throughout the United States, Arizona, coming when it did to the computer game, which was roughly about 2014-15, instead of creating totally separate computer systems and databases for its systems, actually created one. So you have only one database that handles everything within the court system, everything within the recorder's office in terms of recorded documents, and everything in terms of elections and election databases. Everything is contained within one singular database. And what we have found is that during the construction of the database, roughly in 2014 to 15, that in essence, backdoors or trapdoors had been put into the base so that others could get in and could manipulate documents. And what we believed at the time was that court documents certainly had been manipulated. Recorder documents certainly had been manipulated. And of course, the question were vote counts being manipulated as they came into the database? We now can say with absolute certainty, all of that is the case. We have, well over 1,000 cases that we have found to date, and this is without doing a lot of work, of falsified default judgments, falsified criminal restitution orders, falsified child support orders, et cetera, et cetera. These are totally falsified cases in most cases, where a falsified case has been uploaded into the system, where a default judgment has been allegedly issued, but it's a fake document, and where then people posing as attorneys then go after the defendants named in the fake judgment to try to collect money from them. We've seen this in California, by the way. We've seen this happen in Los Angeles County, and it for sure goes on in Maricopa County. Also with that, we also see that with the database for the recorder's office, we have seen documents, not only falsified deeds, going in, so somebody falsifies a document and loads it into the system, but we have seen documents that have been filed and recorded, in other words, loaded into the database for Maricopa County, for the recorder's office, be taken out of the database, manipulated and changed, and then reloaded back in.
How do you see that?
Okay, great question. What we do is that there's a number of things that we do to examine a document. People think that, people think of people as handwriting experts. They know the term handwriting expert, but they don't realize that handwriting expertise is only one small area of question documents examinations. Documents, when they're examined, are examined in several different ways. One of them is just eyeballing the document. Are the fonts different? Do things line up properly or not line up properly? There's a lot of easy things. And like I said, we put this all in the book and we show you, actual documents that we've looked at and why, and we point to, we have arrows going to, so you can see exactly what's phony and how we know it's phony. But for your audience, one of the ways I would say this is, look, you first look at the document. Is there anything on the document, on the face of the document, that's phony? And there's a lot of things you can look at in terms of how things line up. If you have a page of stuff that's straight and then all of a sudden things are slightly slanted, that's one. I'll give you an example. In the falsified access liens, which are the Medicaid fraud, the notarization, the form is signed off. The form for the lien is signed off by an individual and then notarized. Okay. One of the things that we have is we have thousands, literally thousands of the notarized documents where the notarization is slightly tilted in every single document in exactly the same spot. Meaning if you lined up the pages together, this is not a notary stamp, this is a graphic. So on its face, you can see 1,000 documents where the notary stamp has exactly the same tilt from the exact same position. You know that that's not a notary stamp, but rather that's a graphic print. Okay, so those are things you can see on the surface of the documents. Okay, that's the easy stuff.
Are a lot of these coming from the same notary?
Oh, all the same notary.
All of these.
Well, and it's even, let me tell you how it's even worse than that.
Okay.
In most states, including Arizona, you have to renew your notary commission every 4 years. So your notary commission lasts 4 years. And as long as you're not in trouble or anything, you just renew it. You pay, it's more a way state makes the fee. So every 4 years, you pay a $50 fee and it just renews. Not only do we have this angle on the notary stamp, but we have that continuing through multiple notary years. So the first 4 years, we have this. Second 4 years, we have this. Third 4 years, we have this. And not only is the notary stamp angled the same, but for the first 4 years, it lines up at this spot. Second 4 years, it lines up at this spot. Last 4 years, it lines up at this spot, meaning this is a graphic print. It's not an actual notary stamp. Now, that's not to mention the fact that we know that the signature of the person who signs off on it is a forgery. We know that the notary itself is a forgery. In fact, what they did here was the notary person, a Melissa Bledsoe, actually did exist. She lived in Arizona in the 1960s, and she actually bought properties in the 1960s. And they actually went out and stole her signature. So this person who lived in Arizona in the 60s, who had recorded documents, recorded deeds with their signature on it, just like you buy a house, she's got a recorded deed. They literally lifted her signature and then used it to create this fake notary. So we have with Mary Lou Bledsoe, not Melissa, Mary Lou Bledsoe. So with Mary Lou Bledsoe, we actually have in her case over 25,000 falsified notarized documents
under her name.
Under her name. Now, the fun part is that from time to time, people get really sloppy. When you're doing that much fraud, people get really sloppy. And the name of the person who signs off on this documents is Susan Womack, notarized by Mary Lou Bledsoe, except in a couple of cases where they forgot which one was the notary and which one was the signer, and they reversed it. So we actually have several documents where Mary Lou Bledsoe is the signer of the document and Susan Womack is the notary on the document.
Oh, man. So when somebody's going to get something notarized, when you're talking about it being an angled graphic versus a proper notary stamp, is this not a hand-stamped thing?
Yeah, and so what would happen is because this is literally, you put the thing down, it's one of those, self-inked stamps usually. Yeah. In the old days, people used to use the stamp pad, do this kind of thing, et cetera. Now, these are normally this day and age self ones. So you put them down kind of, straight down and you push down and then you lift it back up and it's self-inking every time.
Yeah, it's the one that's a little rectangle for people that are listening and not watching. Exactly. And you press it down and it flips over and presses onto the paper.
That's exactly right. And so what you would expect to see is that you could see a lot of them be pretty close in lineup, but they would never be exactly the same and they would never be in exactly the same position. They can't be. It's all done by hand, every single one. Okay. So when we have 25,000 of these where the angle is exactly, where you can put these on top of each other and they're in exactly the same spot, we know by looking at them, that can't be, this is a graphic, it's not an actual notary stamp.
They don't just have exceptional muscle memory. That's not what's going on.
Yeah, it's not possible. Okay. And to have the same angle repeatedly, but just move it over. So the first 4 years starts here, the next 4 years starts here, the next 4 years starts here, where the stamp lines up. Yeah, I mean, that's a fraud. That's one of those easy frauds to detect.
Right on.
And so that's a great example of what happens. So when we first look at a document, you look at it on its face and you can find things that don't line up or overly line up. A way to tell somebody's, lifted a signature, which is easy to do these days, is it exactly the same signature? Just put it on top of the paper. Can you see it? So there's a lot of things you can just do on the face of it that make it simple. The next thing that's done here is to actually examine the signatures. And there's a lot of things. It's not just the handwriting. People who are doing thousands of forged documents or falsified documents are not going to write them in the same handwriting in the same way. But there are things about style that you can't get rid of. So unlike a handwriting expert who's looking at it, did Joe Smith sign this document? Did Joe Smith sign this document? What we're looking for is handwriting patterns. And when we're looking at people who we know are committing fraud, we gather as many documents that we know are theirs as possible. In the case of our main fraudster here, Brittany Ray Chavez, what we looked at was over, I think, 200 or so signatures of hers that we could get and handwritings of hers. Fortunately, we were lucky. She actually at one point kept a journal. And because she kept a journal that she wrote by hand, we had pages upon pages upon pages upon pages of her handprinting. And then we had documents. We had official documents that she had signed. We had unofficial documents that she signed. We had notes that she had written, on and on and on. So we take all of those and what our forensic question documents examiner does is makes a pattern out of those. What's the pattern of writing? Where does things begin? Where do they end? Where does she start her letters? Where does she end her letters, et cetera, et cetera. So it's kind of almost mathematical in a sense, because what you're looking is for a pattern of writing. So the style might be a little different. One of the examples is one of the things that they will do to try to make it not look exactly the same is they'll take a document, put it on a lazy Susan, and rotate the lazy Susan over, maybe 30 degrees, and then sign it that way. So it makes the handwriting look different. So if you just look at the writing, it may not immediately look the same to you until you start breaking down the document. Where does the A start? Where does the B start? Where does the C start? Where does it end? What's the little squiggle on this? Where are the pressure points? So another thing that they look at is where are the pressure points? In other words, when the person is writing at various points, we all stop. Nobody just continuously goes. No matter how fast you think you're going, there are points of stoppage where the ink builds up on the paper, where you can see, if you look at them carefully, you can see little almost dot-like areas or little buildup areas on the paper. So we look to see similarities in that. So that's another thing. That's another thing we look at. And then what we look at is something called pre-flight. Now, this is where we get a little complicated. So once we've looked at the document, examined the document, looked at everything on the document, we now put it into something called pre-flight software. For anybody out there who's a graphic artist, they will know what this is. Before you go to print, if you're doing a magazine, you're doing a billboard, you're doing a newspaper, anything like that, anything that's going to be a graphic designed anything. Before you go to print, you will run something called pre-flight software. And pre-flight software is now very, very, very complex. It looks at a document and it tells you all of the inconsistencies with the document. The main theory being is that if you're supposed to have everything in 300 DPI, have everything with a certain thickness of 300 DPI, which is kind of a standard print thickness, you want to make sure that your whole document is that way. And so pre-flight will run a test on it to say, yes, this entire document is all in 300 DPI. Or if you wanted it really thick, if you're printing out photos and stuff, generally you want to print out photos at 300, but if you want to put really high quality photos, you print them out at 600 DPI, dots per inch. So this pre-flight software will tell you at any point where that's not consistent. That's the whole idea. So it's for graphic art designers, essentially. It was originally created for, so that they could be sure that everything on their document was correct to the highest standard that they were looking for before it went off to print. But it's become a great, great tool for question documents examiners, because now with pre-flight software, we can tell the difference on the document between the original print of the document, which is normally done at 300, it's scanned at 300 DPI, and anything that's not 300. So give you an example. We have a number of judgment documents in the Maricopa County Superior Court, where part of the document is in 300 DPI, but part of the document has things that were removed from it, erased from it, whited out, whatever went on there, and recreated in 100 DPI. And then loaded back into the database.
Okay.
So if I just took a document, I don't have one here, but let's just this is a document, okay? And I'm going to load this into my scanner. What's going to happen is my scanner is going to be set at a certain DPI, a certain level. It's going to be high resolution, medium resolution, low resolution, whatever it is, it's going to be at something. And that entire document, all the pages that go through, are all going to be scanned at that resolution. So if I'm scanning at high resolution, chances are it's at 300 dots per inch. If I'm scanning at medium resolution, it's probably either 200 or 150, and it goes down from there. One of the things that happens is that if you take print off of the internet gives you things in 72 DPI. So again, one of the things that graphic artists want to do is that if they take a photo off of the internet, they want to make sure that it's not a photo at low resolution at 72 DPI, or as that expands, it starts to pixelate and fall apart. So that's what the software does. Well, what we do with it is that we take a court document, that's been provided to us, and we throw it into the pre-flight software. And what it can tell us is it will say, this section wasn't there before, it was added on after the fact. This section is in 200 DPI, but this section's in 300 DPI, meaning this was not the original document that got scanned, because the original one would all be exactly the same all the way through, because it's a singular scan.
So when you said the internet prints things at 72 DPI, or it offers that digital version to be printed, right, is that every single browser? How is that determined by the internet?
No, generally speaking, if you're using PHP or HTML, if you're using any of the basic programs, WordPress now people use, et cetera, to put things in the internet.
So for people that don't know, those are programming codes.
Right. What happens is that if I'm creating a website, and I take a photo and I put the photo on the website, because I want you to see beautiful Hawaii. So I take photos I took of Hawaii and I put it up there because I'm going to do travel to Hawaii and I'm going to run a travel agency, whatever. So I put photos up there. The photos, unless you do them differently, unless you have other reasons to do this, generally speaking, when you load that through the HTML code, when you load that into your website, you go to GoDaddy or one of those sites or Wix, and you create your own website, and it says, here, do you want a photo here? Yes, I want a photo here. And you drag and drop your photo into there. The photo resolution is, no matter what resolution you have for your photo, the photo resolution on that website is going to be 72 dpi. That
Awesome.
means that when you, as the consumer, now look at my website and you say, oh, that's a really pretty picture of the Hawaiian sunset, I want to download that picture. When you download it, it will download at 72 dpi, even if I uploaded it at 600 dpi. Okay.
Thank you. That's perfect explanation.
Right. That's what it means. So the internet, so the people will tell you, anybody who's ever done this knows that you don't generally want to use a photo from the internet unless it specifically says it's high resolution, because otherwise, when you print that, when you go to print that out, if it's in any size whatsoever, it starts to fall apart. It starts to pixelate out and fall apart and become blurry. So anybody who's ever taken a photo off the internet knows that this happens. And you can always buy, like if you wanted to do, say, a montage of the Civil War. So you went and found, Brady's photographs of the Civil War. And you want to do a montage, say you're a teacher and you want to do a montage for your class. You could easily find those photos and dump them into a montage. The problem would be is that after you dump them in, they're in very low resolution. So they don't look very good. However, you can go to sites that either for free sometimes or sell high-end images. We'll sell them in large DPI, large size images that you can usually spend some money on and buy and use. So you can do it. So one of the things, like I said, we look for changes to the document. If the pre-flight will actually tell us that something was added in, it'll tell us this section was not on the original document. Because again, it will measure all of these different codes and tell us. It'll measure photos, it'll measure pictures, it'll measure signatures, for example. Is the signature a graphic? In other words, does somebody sign this, or is this a created signature? Is this a graphic stamp that somebody used, similar to the notary? And it'll tell us what that DPI is. And so ultimately what you get is I just looked at one today on a case where we have a pre-flight software on a falsified insurance application. And the pre-flight software is probably almost 20 pages long because it goes through about 25 pages of application, and it tells us all the things that are wrong with that document. Why is that document a phony? What was changed? What was taken out? What was put on later after the fact? Even to the point, I'll give you even a better example. Most people use Times New Roman when they type on their computer. It's just standard. They'll use Calibri or they'll use Times New Roman, and that's pretty standard stuff. If you do your document in Word and you use Times New Roman 12 point, which is standard stuff, and then you send me the document to correct, to add, to subtract, to edit, whatever, and I use Times New Roman 12, you would think that that document would all be the same. It's all Times New Roman 12. You'd be wrong. In fact, what the pre-flight software will tell me is the exact measurements of your Times New Roman 12 and the exact measurements of mine, and they will be slightly different. So yours might be 12.095 and mine might be 12.125. And it'll tell me this was not done when this was done because this Times New Roman is slightly different than this Times New Roman. And it's those slight differences that tell me that you sent somebody the document and somebody else worked on the document.
That is detailed.
Yeah.
Very cool.
So that's what we look at. When we look at those things with the recorder's office, now when we look at those things, as I said, with the Superior Court, we can see that the judgments are falsified. We can see in some cases that the judgment itself is totally false and loaded up. We can see other times where somebody took a pre-done judgment. We see this in family court a lot, where they've taken a pre-done judgment because the same things are boilerplate over and over again. And what they'll do is they'll put in different party names and that case number, and then load in that document. So somebody who doesn't like the way the judgment is coming out in their case can take a different judgment, change the names on it, change the case number on it, and load it back up and make it seem like that's the real judgment. That's how phony this gets. With the recorder's office, what we've been able to determine is that on a number of loans and deed documents, a lot of stuff was left blank loaded into the system, pulled back off the system with new or different information put into it. In one particular case, for example, we had a document that evidenced a loan provided by Wells Fargo that's then being sold to Freddie Mac, which is one of the government's mortgage providers. It's very common that lower dollar transactions, banks will sell that loan to the government. That's what they do. They do it all the time. That's kind of how we had the whole mortgage collapse problem in 2008.
Yes.
What happens is that in this particular case was that the original documentation did not provide for Wells Fargo. It did not provide for even the notarization of the document. And then what was done, it was loaded into the system, taken back off the system. Notarizations were then put on the document. Wells Fargo's information was then put on the document. And that loan, which didn't exist, was then sold to Freddie Mac for whatever the profit was on the sale.
Wow. Now, when it comes to corruption of individuals in the Arizona state government, do you, as you're finding these things and documenting them and organizing it all, do you have like a packet on each person and what documents they've falsified and how you know?
Yes. The simple answer to that is yes.
Awesome.
We have both. We have not only, look, 4 years of investigation. You can imagine it's amazing how I can go back to stuff in the first year and say, geez, I forgot I had that. I forgot I had that. I forgot I had that. But we are very, very, very good at cataloging our stuff. You have to be. I am one of the worst catalogers in the world, to be very honest about this. I am horrible at this. Fortunately, everyone else is far better at it than I. But it is absolutely necessary, especially in this day and age where you're pulling off so many digital documents, to keep separate databases. So, for example, you asked me earlier today about a particular person, and I'm able to go into the database that we have. And we just, the database exists in different forms for us. We keep these, I won't tell you all the ways we keep them specifically, but we keep these on different cloud servers, different storage things, and we keep them for different purposes. So they're cross-referenced in about 5 different ways. You wouldn't be able, you might be able to steal our documents, but you wouldn't be able to destroy our documents. We have them in too many places. And we have them in different methods. So different, I'm really good at just going, oh, let me run a search through this entire database and see what's in there. Other people are much better at subcategorizing everything that we do. Yes. So, like, for example, the individual you asked me about, I was able just to run the name and come up with 5 deeds in 5 seconds.
Right on.
Just by running the name. So a lot of it, a lot of the work, I mean, a lot of you want to make your life easier, title the document correctly. So almost invariably, when we're looking at a particular individual, we're going to research a particular individual, the first word in that document is that individual's name, and then a very brief description of the document. And we've gotten to the point where we all kind of know each other's shorthand. There's about 6 or 7 of us who access these. So we all kind of know each other's shorthand. So I know what it means when somebody puts a document into the system. So I know pretty quickly what it is I'm pulling out. And so, yeah, and on what you asked me about earlier, we were able to find 5 documents in about a minute.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that a little bit, because the way I became aware of your work was I was watching live Jacqueline Brigger give that testimony at the election commission, the joint Arizona Election Commission, and I was blown away. And then I saw the reactions of the people on the panel, specifically Ken Bennett, that he was blindsided, it looked like. And he's like, oh, how did you get this information? Who all knows about it? When did you give it? Did you give it in person? Asking all these questions. They're like, he seems like he's shitting bricks over there.
Yeah, so, I mean, Ken Bennett is kind of a absolutely fascinating example of this interesting problem. It's funny because almost any interview I've given over the past now almost a year, the first question I'm asked about is, did you see Ken Bennett's reaction? Mm-hmm. And the answer is I actually, in real time, I really wasn't paying strict enough attention to see it. But everybody saw it. Everybody points it out. And I'm sure if Ken had a chance to do it all over again, he would have reacted quite differently, or with no reaction at all, because it's so pronounced that you can't miss it.
Yeah.
And that's very unfortunate for him. He immediately, just so everybody knows, Ken Bennett is a state senator. He was on this committee. He interrupted Jackie's presentation a couple of times, actually, to try to stop it. And then to make matters worse, when it was finished, I mean, he immediately jumped out of his seat and ran out of the room. We know exactly what he was doing. I mean, poor Ken, he can't buy a break on this. Poor Ken was immediately texting Ben Toma and Adrian Fontes, telling them what was going on.
How do you know that?
Because we're really good. Can't tell you, but we're really good.
But you know it for a fact.
Yeah, no, for a fact.
Is that in the book?
I believe it is. I believe it is.
The reason I'm asking so specifically is because Ken Bennett happens to be my representative for the district I live in. I interviewed him last week. I asked him about some of this stuff. It seemed like he wasn't being totally honest with me. And from what I could tell from that and the other interactions with him I've seen, it just seems like there's more going on behind closed doors than what he lets on. Additionally, there are a lot of people in this community that I know who know him personally and who like him and who respect him, which I get. He's a personable guy. I talk to him. I like him as a person. However, the job he's doing in representing us, the people, he's doing more than that, and it's not good, is the gist that I get. That's why I'm asking you so specifically about this, because he's running for re-election to in this district to try and maintain the position he currently holds, which I don't think he should, especially if what you're talking about is true, which it very clearly is.
Look, Ken, look, let me say this. I think it should have been obvious. I have obviously not seen the interview that you did with him. I would say this, however, Ken is not a mastermind criminal. And I think, nobody would find him to be such. The problem with the corruption is that a lot of people who may not be, brain surgeons in all of this, or rocket surgeons and brain scientists, we like to say, are caught up in it because part of being in the elected system in Arizona, places you in this kind of jeopardy. There's a couple of facts for your audience on this, which I think set up the basis for what you're asking about. Arizona is not put this way, Arizona is a citizen legislature. What that means is that these citizens who become members of the legislature are paid very little.
Yes.
And by very little, they're paid about, give or take, about $24,000 a year.
Yes.
So they are not making a living being in the legislature. The point of that is to get people to be there for a period of time and then go back to whatever it was they did, citizen legislature, instead of having professional politicians. The problem with this is that if there was ever a door that goes, that opens up for corruption, this is it. Because if all you are earning as a legislator is $24,000 a year, then that is not your day job, and you've got to have other work. It should probably surprise nobody that roughly 40% of the Arizona legislature is directly involved in the real estate business. 40%.
Yes.
You do not have this number anywhere else in the United States, and you never have. But people are involved in real estate. And one of the reasons is because when they come to Phoenix, when they come to the Capitol, they are wheeling and dealing. So in addition to the work that they are doing, on any particular bill on any given day, they are wheeling and dealing in their real estate businesses. If you're going to corrupt a politician, then you have two ways of doing it. You either take somebody who's been elected and try to corrupt them from the election position, which is mostly done by trying to prop up their business, whatever that is. And if it's anything in real estate, obviously people can figure out how you do that. Or you take people who are in the real estate business, especially people who may not be all that up and up to begin with. They may not be horribly shady, but they may not be on the up and up to begin with. And you basically get them to become a member of the legislature. And so in a lot of cases in Arizona, it starts with the person being in the corruption business and then becoming a member of the legislature. And that becomes a big problem. But as long as you have, and I don't disagree with citizen legislators, But as long as you have this problem of not paying legislatures, a living wage, for what the job is, you're always going to have them working side hustles that are really primary hustles in order to make money. And that just opens this door to the horrific corruption and bribery.
Have you found any evidence of blackmail or extortion?
I let me put it this way. Some of what you asked I can't answer because there are investigations ongoing about that. I would say it this way. We were not specifically asked to look at that, so we didn't. But is there evidence of it? Yes. What you oftentimes have, and this is where the problem comes, is that you have this crossover between I will support your real estate deal, your real estate development deal, if you vote for my bill. If you don't vote for my bill, I will make sure your real estate deal doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So you get that kind of extortion. And what should be kind of clearly noted here, because it's the same thing that we have in Mesa, is that a lot of laws that are, not the stuff that's proposed, people propose all sorts of stuff, but the stuff that generally gets passed in Arizona, unless there's an emergency, unless there's an emergency flood or something like that, the bills that generally get passed on an annual basis are generally designed to help those who are already corrupt.
Yes.
There's a lot of, and we can talk about that if you want. There's a lot of details to that, and I put them in the book, and I think it's easier to read in the book. But one is, for example, rules regarding notaries. How can you have thousands upon thousands of falsified notaries, people who are not notaries, but there's a notary stamp and a signature that they're in the system? Easy, because the laws that have been passed regarding notaries in Arizona actually make it easier for fraud to occur within the notary. Make it much easier for the notary to be a fake. That's how it was created. There are laws that are passed as late as recently as 2020. Law that went into effect in May 2020 actually makes it easier for notary fraud to occur. So a lot of the laws that get passed actually make it easier for these frauds to take place. They reduce oversight, they reduce the safeguards, and so you actually are worsening the problem. And why not? Because if you're making $24,000 from the legislature and you're making, $100,000, $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 outside of it, then definitely what you're going to do within the legislature is protect that hustle.
Yes. As for Ken Bennett, can we talk a little bit about the details of the deeds and the trusts?
Yeah, let me talk a little bit about the deeds and how they work a little bit. I know this is a very confusing area for people. Like I said, we break this down. There's a whole chapter 16 of the book is an entire chapter. It's probably the longest chapter because it involves also using documents. So it's almost 100 pages of the book that involve the actual documents so people can see within the book without having to go to the footnotes what we're talking about. And we try to explain this in various different ways. There are various different schemes here. This is not a one-size-fits-all, but there are basically, I may catch myself and say there are more as I go through this, but there's basically several different ways that money laundering through property work. It can involve different players. It can involve some slight variations to the theme here, but I'll give you kind of an idea, and then you'll have an idea of what we're looking at. One of the main ways monies get laundered is just simply purchasing property. Well, you sell a lot of drugs. You sell kilos of cocaine. You wind up with a whole lot of cash. The cash has to go somewhere. It used to be prior to the Patriot Act that the monies could go in a trunk of the car and could be driven into Mexico and given to a bank in Mexico. After 2003, 2004, you couldn't do that anymore because under the Patriot Act, there was as much scrutiny of things going out as there is coming in. For people in Arizona who drive down oftentimes to say Rocky Point in Mexico, to some of the shoreline communities in Mexico, which is very common, to own timeshares and go there. They know that they are not heavily scrutinized, but they are certainly stopped at the border going into Mexico as they are coming back into the United States. So once the Patriot Act passed, trying to get monies in the trunk of a car out of the country became much more difficult. So think about it this way. There's $15 billion annually that circulates through just the state of Arizona. About $150 billion throughout the United States annually on illegal, illicit narcotics, but about $15 billion, about 10% of that running through the state of Arizona. Okay?
Just on
$15 billion.
narcotics?
Yeah, just on narcotics. $15 billion. Where's it going to go? Where's it go? It's not going in the mattress. You couldn't put it there even if you wanted to. It's not going in a mattress. So you have to find ways to launder the cash. You have to, because you got to do something with it. You can't literally shove it into the walls. I mean, that actually happens, by the way. But there's a limit to this. The cash has to move. So how do you move it? Well, the easiest way is you take 100 grand and you buy a house. Now, remember, Arizona prices have gone up in the last few years, but certainly, especially after the Great Recession, prices were in the toilet. You could buy a single-family residence for $75,000 in outlying areas of Phoenix, in those outlying suburban areas. Now it's more. Now it's maybe 150, 175,000, but you can still buy a starter home for this amount. And you have developments, fortunately, helped by developers. You've got developments all over the major cities. So Tucson, especially, and Phoenix. Just take Phoenix. In Phoenix, you have on the outer areas, you have Litchfield Park. You've got Goodyear. You've got Buckeye. You've got Surprise. You've got these communities that are all within roughly about an hour of downtown Phoenix that have really sprung up over the last 10 years.
Yeah.
And with them, inexpensive housing. Inexpensive housing, starter houses for people to buy. Neat neighborhoods built by developers. So you could just take the cash and go buy a house. Nobody asked where the cash came from. Now, there are requirements, there are reporting requirements. I don't want to make this as simple as this because it's a little more complicated. Okay. But without getting into all the reporting requirements that exist here, you can simply take the cash and buy a house. This has been done for years. It is a staple of the business in northwestern California, where marijuana is grown, especially when marijuana was illegal. That monies made off of marijuana purchases almost invariably went into real property, went into buying houses, and then ultimately selling houses. And there's a great way to launder cash. It still happens. This has been going on in the Midwest for, really since the 80s. Since cocaine imports became big. It wasn't as big with marijuana in the Midwest, but once cocaine imports became very big in the 1980s, taking the cash made off of cocaine and buying properties. Remember, California is a huge state. Arizona is actually a pretty good sized state. But because you have so many states that border Illinois, any monies that were going through Chicago, which was a lot of the cocaine traffic, went through Chicago. What would then happen is the monies coming from those transactions would go out to other areas of Illinois, would go to Indiana, would go to Iowa, where real estate agents would be retained simply to buy inexpensive single-family residences using the cash made from the drug transactions. Mm-hmm. So not an uncommon deal at all. Arizona is especially equipped for this because you have a lot of new development over the last 20 years. And you have a lot of new development, since the Patriot Act was passed, and you have a lot of new development on outskirt areas, making the prices reasonably affordable. So you can go and you can buy, again, $150,000 homes very easily, and usually with new development on very easy terms. I mean, if you're coming in with an all-cash buyer, there's nobody looking at anything. Here's the cash. Here's the keys. Thank you very much. That's it. Okay, so that's one way it's done. Another way it's done, and that just moves the cash. You buy the house, you put somebody's name on the title, usually a fake name on the title. Again, when you're buying cash for developers, they don't care who the hell you are. You just bought the house. They're filling up. They built 1,000 houses. They're thrilled to get rid of them. Great, you bought one. Have a nice day. Keep it for a couple of years. Sell the property. Bank the cash. Move the cash to something else. On and on and on and on the cash goes. Another way it's done is with illegal aliens, with illegal immigration. One of the things that most people don't know is that illegal aliens in this country are not prohibited from buying residences. And in fact, in some states, it's actually encouraged. And there's a number of years where Arizona's actually encouraged this. Well, here's what actually happens. So if I'm a drug supplier, not so much the street dealer we're talking about here, but we're talking about drug suppliers and distributors, talking about the higher end. So I've got hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars of cash that I've got to get rid of. I've got to launder. We bring in husband and wife illegal alien. We set them up in the house. We put the house in their name. They are the buyers of the house. Since they probably don't have 100 grand in cash, or that would be really suspicious if they do, we set up a mortgage We get them approved through a private mortgage lender, which is a fakely set up, falsified set up company, to lend the money on the purchase. So again, we go out to these new developments, these new development areas where you had a house for $100,000, a starter home, a 2-bedroom, 2-bath house, and we have two people coming over the border who are illegal, who buy this house, applying for a mortgage from this private mortgage lender, who approves the loan, obviously, and then the money, instead of coming from the individuals, comes from this mortgage lender, and it goes in. Husband and wife hold the house for a couple of years. That's their starter, and so rather than paying coyotes to bring them over the border, they're essentially given the house to live in for 2 years. That's what they do. And so they live in the house, they keep up the house, they move out, house is sold, money's laundered. So that's another way it's done. Another way it's done is through construction loans. Okay, all of these developers have to have construction loans because what do they have to pay here? They have to pay roofers. They've got to pay, they got to pay contractors. They got to pay electrical. They got to pay for concrete. On and on and on and on. I mean, you can think of all the things that are needed to build an entire housing neighborhood. That's great because there's no way to know that all of the concrete was supplied by Joe's Concrete and Jim's concrete service didn't actually supply anything. Yet there's a bill from Jim's concrete service for $500,000 for pouring concrete. How's that bill paid? The laundered cash. The laundered cash goes to pay this company set up as a corporation in the state of Arizona or an LLC set up in Arizona. And this bill goes. Now, given what it costs to build, say 1,000 homes, you can easily bury several $1 million in these falsified invoices from these construction companies. So that's another way money is laundered. So that kind of gives you, I think, the basis of this. Now, when it comes to politicians, how does this work? When it comes to politicians, the mortgage is the bribe. So what happens with politicians is that if I want to corrupt a politician, firstly, I want to get them before they enter office. If I want to corrupt a judge, I want to corrupt them when they are a lawyer or corrupt them into becoming a judge. I don't want to come in with a suitcase of cash once they're already on the bench. I want to put into play the very people I need. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find people, in Arizona, it actually makes this easy. It's not anybody's fault, but it actually makes this easy. Think about it this way. You've got a situation here where you've got, what do you have? You have all these different districts, and these districts have precinct captains, and they have, people within them, and on and on and on, who may ultimately want to have that office, may want to hold that office. So you have a very good idea of who's going to ultimately run for an office. And when you've got that, you can go to those people and you can say, hey, you're going to need money to run for office. You're going to ultimately want to do that. I'm going to help you finance your campaign. And part of the way I'm going to do that right now is I'm going to reduce your mortgage. And the way we're going to do it is you're going to refinance your property. And I've got a sweetheart deal here with this specific mortgage company that's going to provide the mortgage money to you. And guess what? You're going to get to write off the interest, which, in the last few years hasn't been much until recently, but say at the normal rates, like they are now, about 5, 6, 7%, you're going to be able to write off your mortgage interest, but you're not going to have to repay all of that. It's going to look like you are. We're going to give you a 1099 at the end of the year showing that you paid, X amount of dollars in mortgage interest, which makes it look like you paid your mortgage, but you really didn't. You paid either a portion of it or maybe none of it at all. The mortgage itself becomes the bribe. And there's no way to know that because the tax returns being filed, the documents being filed with the tax returns showing that you're taking the standard mortgage interest deduction, which people, normally people do, shows up on there and makes it look like you're paying your mortgage. Unless somebody actually audited you to look at the payments, you'd never know that the mortgage wasn't actually being paid because everything else looks like it's standard operating procedure. It doesn't look off. And that way, how would anybody know you were being bribed? They wouldn't. Unless you're someone like me who actually not only looks at the deeds, in this case, we not only for that look at the deeds to see the falsified notarizations, to see the inconsistent signatures, but we also go a step further and we look at the mortgage companies. And what we find is that there's about 4 or 5 mortgage companies. I think ultimately there's about 13 or so that can be identified but 5 that we initially were able to identify as showing up over and over and over again in falsified transactions. And of course, when we went to the Arizona Corporations Commission documents, which show, the annual reports filed by those corporations, we were able to find that the handwritings on the documents that were filed with the ACC matched the handwritings of the falsified notarizations.
Okay. So when you have these deeds that are being notarized falsely, and are they also all being done by the same person?
There's about 3 or 4 different people we've been able to identify as being the main thrust of that. Now, that doesn't mean there's not more people involved, but in terms of what we were looking at, we were able to identify 3 different individuals who consistently falsified deed documents and also consistently filed the supporting documents, usually for a mortgage company or for a title company, within the Arizona Corporations Commission.
If you're able to say these people's names, please do.
Oh, yeah, no, we have, and we say so in the book. I mean, that would be Donna Ray Chavez, that would be Brittany Ray Chavez, and that would be, and it, depending on when, that would be John Chavez.
Okay.
Now, there's 2, just so we're clear, there are 2 John Chavezes. There's John Sr. and there's John Jr. And we have found documents both from John Sr. and from John Jr. at different times.
Okay. All right, let's open the file folder on Ken Bennett. What did you find when it comes to falsified deeds with him? What is his actual involvement in fraud, bribery, or otherwise?
Well, it's one of those things where I will tell you what we found, and I'll tell you what it means to us in what we found. It could mean more than what we found. But I'll tell you what we found and why it was problematic, which is about the easiest way to do it. We looked at Ken Bennett's deeds going back to 2005, and we found a number of trust deeds. And what we found on all of them is that we had one from 2005, one from 2006, actually 2 from 2006, one from 2019, and one from 2022. And what we found on these documents was that the notarizations were falsified, which is commonly what we find. And we found in one particular case on one of them that the document isn't even signed by him; it's signed by a power of attorney. So his signature on the one that has the most problems to it, we found that his signature isn't even on it; it's signed by a third person on his behalf.
Is it illegal for a power of attorney to do that?
No, not at all.
Okay.
The problem is that when a power of attorney does that, there has to be an official notarized power of attorney document, and usually what happens is the copy of that power of attorney document is attached to the document that's signed. That was not the case here. So other than the signature person saying, so, Joe Smith on behalf of Ken Bennett, that kind of thing. Other than that part of it, there's nothing else there that would confirm that there was ever a power of attorney. But on that one, there were also other things too. There was, the lack of a middle name was used there. Like I said, it was power of attorney signature, so you couldn't get an actual signature. On the other ones, the 2005, the 2006, and the 2019, all of these had signatures of Mr. Bennett and his wife, both parties. And on them, all of those notarizations, all of them were falsified notarizations. And we could identify whose handwriting they are.
Is it possible that they went to go purchase a house and went to get something notarized, and it was notarized by somebody who's not actually a notary? And they had no idea?
Well, let's put it this way. By definition, because we can identify let me put it this way. On those 4 documents with notaries, even though there's an attempt to sign the name differently, the handwriting of the notary, there's 4 different names of notaries. I could actually give you the names.
Sure.
There's a Joy Jennings. There is a Hannah Barton. There is a Sandy Riley. Just to name a few. Why those three different people have the same handwriting would be a mystery to me.
Okay. Is it
So yes,
possible? Is it possible that that was done without the knowledge of Mr. Bennett and his wife?
yes and no, and I'll explain what I mean by that. Yes, it could have been done, or some of it could have been done without their knowledge to the specifics, but to their knowledge that a crime was being committed, no, that they would have had to have known.
They would have had to known that it was being done falsely.
Absolutely. And I'll give you an example of this. We actually have on the reporttothegovernor.com website, we put together three different, I think there's three, it might be four now, but there's three different video presentations in the investigation section. So if you clicked on the investigation tab, we put together from our evidence, not just for the book, not just for the footnotes, but we actually put together three different video presentations of fraudulent stuff, like trying to answer the questions you just asked. One of them was, we have a joke about this. We say, what is a Britney deed is one of them. So one of the presentations is called What is a Britney deed? And it's because of the deeds that are falsely notarized by Brittany Ray Chavez. And so one of the things that we do there is we actually go through a particular individual who is an attorney for the city of Phoenix. And we show that the documents that he has recorded, the documents recorded, are falsified. And they're falsified in two ways. They're falsified in that there are notarizations from Brittany throughout his documents, from Brittany Chavez throughout his documents. So we call those euphemistically Brittany deeds. We also have of four different trust deeds that we examined. Trust deeds are basically deeds for loans, showing that there's a loan on the property. Of the four different trust deeds that we examined, there are three totally different signatures for the husband and wife. So when you say, is it possible husband and wife don't know? Yeah, because they're falsified. But did they not know that this was going on? No, that would be impossible. There's no way for them not to have known that they were refinancing their property. There's no way for them not to have known that they were getting cash back out of the refi. So no, they might not specifically know who did this in their name and who recorded it for them, but they certainly know that they're part of the scheme.
I see. So in Ken Bennett's case, what would he benefit from having these, either buying a house or refinancing a house and having a fake notary? Is that to launder money?
Well, there's a couple things. Remember, this is somebody outside of everything else. This is somebody who runs for office. I mean, this is not the first time Ken Bennett's been in office. He's been in office previously. So this is somebody who's in office. This is somebody who votes. This is somebody who can propose legislation. So what specifically one might need with Ken Bennett, I can't tell you specifically for Ken Bennett, but I can tell you that for all of these folks, you want their vote. You want them, you need them to propose a particular piece of legislation. I mean, for the May 2020 change to the notary rules that actually made it easier for fraud to be committed as a fake notary, somebody had to propose that bill. The legislative members had to vote on it. So either these are the dumbest legislative members of all time who had no idea that what they were voting for was something that was going to create fraud, not prevent it, or these people voted for something that they knew was going to have a benefit for them.
Do you know which bill that was, the number of the bill?
Offhand, I do not.
Okay.
We talk about it in the book, but I can tell you that after it passed in 2020, myself and Ms. Brager actually called the Secretary of State's office and spoke to the person in charge of notarization and went over this bill. It would take a while to explain what it does, but essentially what it does is it actually places a number, has a requirement that notaries put a specific number on the document as a quote unquote notary number. It's a number, however, that does not match up to their actual notary number on file with the Secretary of State. So in other words, if you wanted to look up this notary to see if they were real, the number that's on the document would not tie to the notary database kept by the Secretary of State's office. That's how pathetic this is. So it actually makes it easier to commit the fraud because it makes it look better. It makes it look down. Before 2020, notaries in Arizona were not required to put any number on their notary stamp. So their notary number never appeared. Some people did it, most people did not. So you could never even see the notary number. The change in the law said that they could use a particular number that's not in the database. So what would happen is now it looks more official, but it actually is more fraudulent.
Okay. So if I do go back and find that bill number, I can find out who authored it and who voted for it and all that.
Yeah, and you can, and I wouldn't be surprised if you looked up their deeds and their documents, and also who supported it. Yeah, who voted for it, but who was on the committee, who approved it, who made any modifications to it. I mean, I don't know if the bill started off as being a good idea, which was that the permanent notary number that's listed in the Secretary of State's office was supposed to go on, and then it was changed at the last minute. I don't know. But I can tell you that what it does is it provides that the notary puts on a number that is not a number known to the public and not one they can look up through the database. On the other hand, it actually makes the document look more legitimate.
Yeah, it does. That makes sense. So you have Ken Bennett, who was the Secretary of State, and then you have Katie Hobbs, who was also the Secretary of State. Yes. And then you have ADRIAN Fontes, who is currently the Secretary of State, but was a defense lawyer for the Sinaloa cartel, some people involved with the Fast and Furious scheme.
Yeah, let me say something about this, because I'm going to, before I trash Secretary Fontes, which I'm about to do in a major way. Before I trash him, I'm going to say one thing in his defense.
Okay.
I think I think it is patently unfair to categorize him as a cartel lawyer in the manner in which that's happened. If you believe in the justice system and you believe in what defense attorneys do, they take cases and they represent people. The question that's always asked in law school is, well, if somebody, came to you and they were accused of rape, they were accused of, multiple rapes, would you defend them? And, the answer to the question is, yeah, you're a gun for hire for a reason. And either you believe in the system and the right of representation, or you don't. Now, I understand, it's not for everybody, and people's, tolerances for things are different. And if you simply cannot adequately represent your client because of something you think they've done or they've been accused of, I understand that. I get that. If you're not going to be effective, you shouldn't be in that line of work, and you shouldn't be representing people. However, it is, I think, patently unfair that he is labeled as "quote unquote" cartel lawyer simply because there were people accused of a crime and he represented them. That's what lawyers do. And so it's a little unfair to me that he gets that label, because they needed to be represented. They were being charged with a crime. Everybody who's charged with a crime needs representation and gets it. And so I think that part of it's unfair. Now let me say the other part of this. One of the other videos we have is called Fontes appointment documents. We managed to pull out of Maricopa County after Fontes was a cartel lawyer, as you say, but before he was Secretary of State in 2020, in that magic year in 2020, ADRIAN Fontes was the county recorder for Maricopa County.
Ding, ding, ding.
Ding, ding, ding. During his reign in 2000 through, which started, I'll say, November 2016, but he really starts on the first day of 2017, through his loss in that election, in the 2020 election, to Stephen Richer. So he was there from, say January 1, 2017 to January 1, 2021. So the 4-year period. There are approximately 16 appointment documents that evidence appointments made by ADRIAN Fontes as county recorder to election board positions in Maricopa County, probably 16 of them. 14 of those documents are totally, completely fake.
So when you're saying
the documents are fake, the individuals are fake, the people do not exist, they were not appointed to those positions.
Yes, okay. Just to clarify for people listening, it's not.
Yeah, let me see if I can clarify it and go through it a little bit slowly. Okay. So in Arizona, it is common that when you are appointed to a board or commission position, there's an oath document that the person signs. So the document is divided. It's a one-page document. It's divided into several sections. The top section says, "Hi, I'm the county recorder, or whoever I am appointing. I'm making the following appointment of the following person to the following position." And then it has some boilerplate language about that appointment. Then after that, it then has on it a section that says it has the signature of the person who's been appointed with a notarization. So the middle of the document has a box. It has the person signing that who's getting the appointment, receiving, I'm accepting the appointment, and that acceptance signature is then notarized. The bottom third of the document actually has on it a certification from the county clerk and the recording of that document with the county recorder's office. That's what's on the document. During Mr. Fontes's reign as the county recorder, there are approximately 16 of these appointment documents. Okay, Mr. Fontes's name, handwritten signature name, appears at the top of the document as the county recorder. The signatures of the individuals are falsified. Some of these individuals clearly do not exist. Some may exist, but don't know they were ever appointed to anything. The notarization signature is a fake, so it's a falsified notarization, as is the clerk's signature and dating of the document at the bottom of the document. Moreover, most of these appointments were done almost a year before they were ever recorded. So this person actually took office, allegedly, and received their salary, whoever actually got it, in some cases, more than a year, 14 months before the document was ever recorded. All of these documents were recorded after the 2020 election, meaning that you had at least 14 individuals allegedly appointed to election board positions where the public had no way of knowing that these appointments ever took place, because the actual recording of the documents didn't take place until after the November 2020 election, usually anywhere between 6 and 14 months after the alleged appointment was made.
Wow. Oh, what are we going to do about this?
So we did a video on this. It's about a 30-minute presentation. And not only do we show you why these documents are falsified, we take you through it step by step. It takes about 30 minutes to watch. We take you through each and every document, each and every signature, why they're fake, how they're fake, etc. But we also were able to tie a number of the names. I think on 4 or 5 of the 14, we were actually able to take those names and run them through all the other frauds, and found that in the case of, I think it's either 4 or 5 of them, they actually run to the Medicaid fraud, the access lien Medicaid fraud, that those names also show up in that fraud. So these are names that have been used consistently through other frauds within the frauds that we investigated.
Do you know who's kind of behind all this and who's running these operations?
Yeah, for the most part, we do. And that's one of the things we talk about in the book, which I think is fairly important. We talk about in the book, a number of things, especially at the beginning. One of the things we talk about, which is very complicated, but we tried again to make this, more of a story and a little bit simpler for everybody, is that a lot of this originates from China. A lot of the problems that we have in the United States originate from China. Now, it's not our fault for falling into it and into things, but a lot of this originates from China. Drug supplies, the supplies that go into making drugs, especially fentanyl, all come from China. A lot of the ingredients to make crystal meth, including pseudoephedrine, Sudafed, what used to be Sudafed, comes from China. China has a huge hand in the cartels, in the manufacturing and distribution in the United States of illicit narcotics, especially the ones that are killing us. Within that, the Chinese have made numerous deals, as have the cartels, with the Mormon church, with the LDS church, which is why this concerns Mesa. Most people don't know this and don't know a lot. If you're in the Mormon church, there's a lot of things you know. If you're not in the Mormon church, a lot of things you don't know. The Mormon church has very large-scale agricultural operations in Mexico. In the 1980s, as cocaine became a thing, and cocaine distribution stopped being something going through Miami, but started being something going through Mexico. The problem for the Mormons was getting caught up in the cartel violence. As these cartel districts don't always get along all that well. They don't all like each other. There's a lot of violence there, and the Mormons were getting caught up in it. So the Mormon church made a deal. The LDS church made a deal with the cartels, which essentially allowed for the LDS community to continue to do the agricultural projects that they do in Mexico, be left alone, which they, for the most part, have been, with some limited and very public exception. They mostly have been, in exchange for the money laundering. That's the connection. The money laundering schemes didn't originate with the cartels. They originated with the LDS Church.
Holy crap.
And so what you have here is you have the Mexican drug cartels using systems created by the Mormon Church, by the LDS Church, at least certainly the Arizona LDS Church, to launder money through the same systems, the same techniques that are used to launder money for the LDS Church. That's how this works.
Did you know Ken Bennett is LDS?
Yes.
Is this connection between the cartels and the LDS, is that this is documented in your book?
Yeah, it's documented in my book, and it's also not an unknown for if you this might be what we call kind of those historical truisms. If you know much about the Mormon Church and just in general, I don't mean this in a good or bad way, but if you just simply know the history of the Mormon Church, you will know, especially if you are Mormon, you will know that the Mormon Church has a great deal of followers in Mexico,
Yes.
And has land in Mexico, and it's mostly for agrarian purposes, which is fine. And look, let's face it, if you're in Mexico during the mid to late 80s, as the cocaine trafficking was developing, as the Plata system was developing, as the violence was increasing, look, you're going to make whatever deal you need to make to keep your people safe. I mean, that just kind of goes with the territory. I don't want to make an excuse for this, but it's a pretty logical extension to want to keep your people safe, and that's what they've managed to do. And in exchange, they get the cartel gets certain benefits out of it. It's not an altruistic thing. Why would it be? But it's also not so much an exchange of money. It's an exchange of, we won't we won't bother you, and you let us do the bad things we do. And Arizona is the perfect state for that. And that's the problem. So we do document this in the book. We do talk about money laundering and the Mormon Church in the book. We talk about how the system works. We have interviewed, just so you know, obviously there's a lot of people to talk to who will not go on the record, so to speak, or who names we cannot publish for safety. But we have managed to talk to about a dozen or so, Mormons who are directly involved in this process, not just in Arizona, but also in California and New Mexico, who are involved in the process of laundering cash brought in by the cartels or made through drug sales in the United States.
Wow. Yeah, when you talk about the violence thing and doing what you have to keep your people safe, it's understandable human behavior. And it's crazy to see the trickle-down effect of all that over years and hundreds of thousands.
Well, that's probably the best way to put it. If you think about it now, it doesn't seem that long ago, especially for any of us who are, over 40 or over 50. But the fact of it is that this is 40 plus years. You're talking about the mid 80s. You're almost in the mid 2020s. You're talking about almost 40 years of this developing. And I think it's fair to say, maybe the best way to put it is that this was not minimal by any standard, but certainly this was comparatively minimal, that, a minimal set of schemes that got out of hand. I mean, the easiest way I can put this is that nobody thought that 40 years in the future, an entire state would be dominated by cartel and cartel money. That would be, the state would be essentially run, through the Mormon Church, as a lot of the cities are, and certainly state agencies are. And that, anywhere you turn, whether it's the IRS, office there or the FBI office there or wherever, you're going to find Mormons. I mean, nobody thought about it this way. And nobody thought about the fact that, that the amount of money made in drugs would go from, a couple of $1 million, to 15 billion. I mean, nobody would have perceived, back in the 1980s when this began, that you were going to have this kind of money, this kind of control, and that you'd have, in essence, a superpower, China, funding all of this.
Yeah.
These were not concerns that people in 1985 would have had.
Right. Well, it's incredible because how deep the Sinaloa cartel and these other, how deep it all is in the structure of the government of Arizona, how it's infected all of it, but so few people know about it.
Exactly.
It's incredible because you have all the population of the state of Arizona. What percentage of that population is actually paying attention to politics in any way? It's a smaller percentage than the majority. And then what percentage of that group that's paying attention to politics knows this. So few. Like it's incredible. Well, I'm glad you wrote this book. This is pretty incredible stuff.
Yeah, and like I said, I mean, one of the reasons it's as long as it is normally for clients, we don't need to do that. But, certainly after the February 23rd presentation last year, when I was being attacked, when Ms. Brager was being attacked, when my office was being attacked on all sides, from all of these different people, certainly those involved in all of this, I was going to, essentially shut up the critics. Normally what we do is behind the scenes. Normally we don't write books about it in this way. But given all the criticism that was involved, I felt it, necessary to shut up the critics, to be able to say to the critics, here's the deal, folks. Good luck with your what. I've got the goods, I've got the evidence, I've got all the documents, and here they are, and everyone can see them.
Yeah. So will you talk a little bit about the attempts on your life?
Yeah, there have been, there have been now a total of 6 that I know about. There may be more, but there's 6 that I know about. The first one came in April of 2019. That was when a tire was punctured in such a manner that it was intended to blow out at high speeds.
Mm-hmm.
So that was one. The second one was in July, was technically the night of July 7th of 2019, when I was driving. Actually, interestingly, I was driving from California, from Arizona to California that night, because I had a meeting with several judges the following day about the corruption and about the spillage of the racketeering and corruption into California. And I was essentially poisoned on my way to California.
Wow.
I was given a drink on my way out the door that actually contained hallucinogens. The idea being is that I would crash the car.
Who gave you this drink?
Brittany Chavez.
Was it LSD?
It was analyzed. Well, yes and no. It was in essence psilocybin. It was psilocybin. It was psilocybin mixed with several other chemicals.
Jeez, man.
And fortunately for me, which was this actually saved my life on a couple of occasions. I'm not sure it was an attempt, but there was another attempt at poisoning me on July 4th. So about 3 days earlier, there had been an attempt to poison me, and it was only because I actually had a drink. I'd actually run out. It was 4th of July. I had run out. I was doing work in the backyard. It was 100 and whatever degrees. Welcome to Phoenix.
Yeah.
I'd actually run down the street to the QT and gotten a big, 64-ounce drink. And so I didn't drink the drink that was made and handed to me. And that probably saved me an awful lot. But I did, on July 7th, same thing. I had already actually made a drink for myself. It wasn't iced tea. I don't remember what it was. I was probably Powerade or something. I'd already taken one with me in the car when the other one was provided to me. So I wound up not drinking it. And, as other things happened that evening, it became clear that chances were the drink had been poisoned, and it was ultimately analyzed. We have both the drink, we have the contents of the container, we have the report from it, we have all that material. So that was the second attempt.
Do you know what chemicals were put in that one?
Yeah, they were both the same. It was all in essence psilocybin. There was a design plan, which is discussed in the book, about what was supposed to happen versus what did happen. On the next time this happened was on October 18. That was when my client actually got attacked. This was when 4 officers dressed in Mesa police uniforms broke into my residence in Gilbert. I was actually away overnight on a case. I was just overnight. And I had a client who came out to Arizona, who was staying in my house, who was in my house when 4 men dressed as Mesa police officers broke into the house, grabbed him, tied him up, beat him within an inch of his life, then figured out that they had the wrong guy. Surprise, surprise. Had him zip tied, threw him in the garage while they went through my house looking for certain documents and evidence that we had collected. Ultimately, it took him, I think, 4 or 5 hours to be able to get out of the zip ties and then to go to the hospital and get treated.
Holy
There's a
crap.
declaration from that individual in the book as well, which discusses his ordeal and what happened to him.
Did you file a police report on that?
Yeah, there's a police report filed on that. There's a police report filed on the other two incidents as well.
Probably not with the Mesa Police Department, I expect.
No.
Now, do you know if these
with
were,
the Mesa Police Department? No.
do you know who those individuals were that did that?
To the degree that they were pretty clearly identified, yes. Although, whether these are fake names and fake profiles and identities, is remains to be determined. But yes, we could identify at least, both by name tag but not so much by name tag, but by description of the person. We had a fairly good idea, and even from the conversations between these guys, we were able to pick up,
So
who was who.
these were actual police officers then?
One of them, on several of them, there's still a question because Mesa is, of course, wholly uncooperative in this. One of them, however, for sure is a Mesa police officer, was and is a Mesa police officer, and somebody who has been on the tape. It's also somebody who, going into their history, has a history of planting evidence, falsifying reports, discharging firearm, when they're not allowed to. I mean, a whole number of things. So we were able to pull that person out of all this. So for sure, one of them was a Mesa police officer, who for sure was on the payroll for this. The next event occurred in May of 2021.
Before you dive into that, any average Arizonan who's having their house broken into at night by four men, I would assume are going to shoot at them. Now, wouldn't they have considered this before doing so? Do you know the manner of break-in?
And that would have been great had they not been provided with a key.
Oh,
I
see. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they were actually provided. It's an interesting long story as to how that occurred, but they were actually provided with a key to the property. So when they came in, they literally came in through the front door using a key.
Okay.
So they were essentially not heard until such time as they were grabbing the client. Jeez,
man, that's scary. All right. Yeah. Okay. And then the next one you said is May
9 of 2021. That was actually a threat on not just myself, but also on my son McKinley, and also on Brittany, where Brittany Chavez McKinley, or my son and I, were all supposed to meet at a particular location. I discussed it in detail in the book, so I won't discuss all the details of it, but we were supposed to meet at a particular location, and an individual, a Dominican Republic individual, was sent to the location to do whatever was necessary to break up that meeting. So that's detailed in the book, and that meant break it up by any means possible. Wow. And essentially, there's an interesting story behind it, but the police were actually called by another person, by a third party, to prevent that Dominican individual from harming any of us, which is what stopped that from happening. Otherwise, that would have been a problem. So that's the third one. That's the fourth one. The fifth and sixth ones occurred in December, give or take December 26th, 27th of 2021. And that involved break-ins into my property in another state, where they thought I was. They thought I was located. Fortunately, I was not located there. But they broke in there, and with the intent of killing me there.
How do you know that was their intent?
Because of how they ransacked the place, what they left behind, how they got in, how they got around security. They were clearly not there to steal anything, nor did they steal anything.
I see. And do you know who those people were or are?
We do not know for sure on those.
Okay.
I mean, we know the break-in occurred. We know specifically where we know the place was ransacked specifically to try to find documents, find me. There's a couple of specific things they were looking for. We caught on to it, I think, on the 29th or 30th of December. We caught on to this because I was not there, and immediately made a report on that too.
Wow. And was that the final attempt?
That I know of, yes.
Yeah.
Now, how many have gone on that I don't know about, I don't know. I have been subject to, we now have heard more recently the term swatting. I have had probably over 100 swatting attempts made on me.
Now, when that happens, that's where they take your address and make it public, right?
No, it's much more worse than that. Swatting is actually a process of where a false report is made to the police that something horrible is going on, that somebody's died, somebody's dead, there's a shooting, the house is on fire, whatever the case may be. To try to, it's done. Usually, the reason is to try to create a set of violent acts going on at that person's house. In other words, the idea is that if I call the police and I give them your address and I say, "Hi, I was walking by this address with my dog tonight, and I saw through the window a guy with a gun, and individuals inside tied up.
Yeah,
You better send the police over quickly."
right.
Police are going to come over quickly with guns drawn.
Yes.
They're going to break into your house any way possible. And they're not going to know that the report was false. They're not going to know that there's nothing going on. So they're going to head over there very quickly and try to solve the problem. So swatting is generally used to try to harm an individual by calling in a false police report where the police believe that the individual is involved in a crime, and usually a violent crime.
Murder by proxy.
That's normally what swatting is. So I've had that happen on at least 100 occasions now. Fortunately, they don't always know where I am. So where they've called it in, I haven't been. I'm not even sometimes in the same state. I mean, it hasn't worked out very well. But there's been, if you actually went through Mesa, Scottsdale, Gilbert, Chandler, and you looked at, and probably Phoenix too, and you looked up how many police reports were called in about me, you'd find over 100. Wow. How many of those were true? Absolutely zero.
That's incredible. Okay. Now, I think that's about all I've got. You answered all my questions and more. And is there anything else that you want to share with people?
Yeah, let me say this. I say one of the things I talk about in the book is I talk both about the specifics of everything, the way we've talked about it here, with the examples, with the documents, with the forensic reports, everything, so that people can see all this. But I would say this. One of the things I try to convey in the book is also kind of a macro picture here. And that is that for people in the state of Arizona and other states too, because this isn't just endemic to Arizona, it may be worse there, but this exists in a lot of states. When you wake up in the morning and you understand that there's corruption, you understand that bribery exists, you understand that there's some racketeering, but you don't think it involves you, you don't think it affects you. I hope that by this book, one of the things that I've shown people is that it actually does. Not just on this kind of philosophical level of, oh, it's crime and it's awful. I mean, that's all true. But one of the things that I try very hard to get people to understand is this, and that is that within Arizona, and I'm not the first to have done an investigation on it, by the way, but in the state of Arizona, it is the case that pretty much every institution, every government office, whether it's a state-run office, whether it's a county-run office, whether it's a city-run office, is subject to this corruption. That doesn't mean that everything they do is corrupt. You could have a case go to trial and get a verdict that's a legitimate verdict. You can have a judgment that's a legitimate judgment. All these things function. But all of them have also been corrupted and are subject to this corruption, which means that you don't know when you see something that looks odd. For example, when you find out that there's a collection against you, when you find out there's a judgment against you, et cetera, chances are it's all fake. Chances are it's disrupting your life. We have found, as I said, this isn't just about me. I mean, my story in this and my personal story in this is I hope, very compelling. But what we have found is there are thousands of Arizonans who have been subject to falsified judgments or falsified, restitution orders, who have probably paid money not realizing that these things are falsified. There have been hundreds, if not thousands, of Arizonans who have been falsely charged with crimes, essentially to get them out of the way because they stumbled onto something, or they knew something, or they were a low-level participant maybe in something and didn't realize the bigger picture, and then were falsely charged with crimes and convicted, and probably served jail time, not realizing that it was a setup, not realizing that it was false. When you cannot trust that something coming out of the court system or something coming out of a government agency is true or is proper, when you can't do that, when you can't say to yourself, I know that, there might be a good judge, there might be a bad judge, there might be one who likes me, there might be one who doesn't, but that at least the system, as fair as it can be, is fair. When you can't say that, your society falls apart. And that's what's gone on in Arizona, is that very slowly but very surely, the fabric of what holds any society together, but holds any state and local government and communities together, has fallen apart. And that's only going to get worse, because when you have $15 billion of cash cycling through your state's economy, and I've said this before, if you close down all of that cash tomorrow, if you close down the border, if you stop the drugs, if the cash flow weren't there, the state of Arizona would be bankrupt, would be literally bankrupt. And the consequences would be far worse, for those who know it, far worse than what happened several years ago in Illinois. You would have no money. You would take about 40% of the cash in the current Arizona state budget and remove it. And you see if you could have a court system. You see if you could have police. You see if you could have fire. You see if you could have highway patrol, and state troopers. You see if you can have government services. You take 40% of the cash out of there, the entire thing shuts down. It falls apart. It shuts down. And that's where the state is headed, and which is one of the reasons why nobody wants to clean it up. So even those who know this goes on, even those who are very clear on the concept of what's going on here, have a very hard time getting anywhere and trying to clean it up, because they know that if they do, you better have a contingency plan. Are you, as a taxpayer, I mean, you tell me, are you as a taxpayer willing to fill that bill, willing to to up your property taxes by about 1/3 to 50%? Are you willing to pay sales taxes that go up by 2 or 3 cents, not just 1/4 of a cent? Are you willing to have the income taxes in the state increased so that the schools can operate? You better be sure you're okay with that, because if you're not going to support any reform, and nothing's going to change. And that's the problem. This has gone past a point of no return, where what's going to happen here to clean this up is going to cost billions upon billions of dollars, monies that the state doesn't have a way of collecting. So unless the federal government's going to pick up the bill, which it probably should, but unless it's going to, or pick up a large part of it, you're going to have a very difficult time solving this problem. And yes, it does affect each and every Arizonan every single day, in all sorts of ways, in many ways that you don't even know. If you got an audit, you don't know for sure if that audit notice from the IRS was really from the IRS or is from the local agent who's on the payroll. That's how bad this problem has gotten. And we've actually seen where people who have been involved in investigating corruption in Arizona have actually then immediately been hit with audits. We've heard about this with the Trump thing. We've heard about this with Trump people getting hit with audits, getting hit with government regulations and regulators, and on and on and on, simply because they support Donald Trump. Same thing goes on in Arizona, where people who are involved in investigating corruption, dealing with the corruption, et cetera, have been targets, of all these things in a monumental sort of way, and have not necessarily realized that they are targeted. So if you want to fix this problem, if you want to get the word out there, if you want to remove the Ken Bennett's of the world from office, great, but you better be prepared for what the consequences are going to be at this point to clean this all up.
Is that the only option? Is there no other way to pull back on this and remove an individual or a few individuals at a time and replace them with people of integrity? There's really
because once you've got the entire database system, both at the federal, at the state and local level, hacked into or infiltrated, then you cannot be sure of anything. And one of the things we talk about in the book is that there are people practicing law in Arizona who don't have law degrees. Yes. Their law degree is fake. We talk about this, both in the phantom sense, that we have phantom individuals, fake individuals who allegedly exist with licenses to do things. But we also have it the other way, where we have degrees and we have licenses, et cetera, being held by people who didn't earn those licenses. So when you get to that point and you have to shut down the entire database and recreate it, and recreate your systems. We talk about this in the book a lot, about just things that you could do to fix the problem with the notaries, fix the problem with bribed judges. Just the manner in which you select judges would change that. One of the things California did a number of years ago to reduce corruption, which should be done in Arizona, is take away the city courts. Make the city court structure can stay in place, but make the city courts part of the overall superior court system. so that they're run at the state and county level, not at the city level. Change the manner in which judges become judges. You could do some of these things fairly easily, but if you're going to pull out the number of judges who have taken bribes or have otherwise been corrupted, how are you going to fix that the next day? You know, if you took out a third of the judges, your court system collapses. So how are you fixing that? Who are you going to put in those places the next day? Who are you going to go hire? Who are you going to go hire that's not corrupt? So if you think about all the different institutions that have problems here and what needs to be done to, you know, not only fix the problems and going forward, but, you know, compensate and fix for people going backwards, you're talking billions upon billions of dollars that would have to be spent to do it. And you'd absolutely positively need the federal government's involvement to pay for it.
Wow. Wow. Well, I guess you're really detailing the erosion of our country, and that's an incredible thing. When it comes, I got two other questions off the top of my head. When it comes to the residences that were a part of the voting fraud in this last election, do you know about how many residences were involved in that?
Well, let's put it this way. I wouldn't look at it as being the residences involved. What happens, and I'll give you more Maricopa County, which is the greater Phoenix area, is the best example. Arizona has run for an awfully long time, since the 90s, mail-in ballots. Mail-in ballots are actually not new to Arizona. People think they kind of are. They hadn't really heard of it. But mail-in ballots have actually been a thing in Arizona since the 90s. Arizona as a state has, I think, give or take, it's you know, I think give or take it's about 6 million registered voters, something to that effect. 3 million or so, about half, vote by mail-in ballot. So, you know, that's a pretty high percentage. Doesn't really exist that way in other states. You know, Arizona also has a lot of rural areas. That's not real surprising given given the makeup of the state. In Maricopa County, they get about 1.2 million mail-in ballots. It's a lot for a county. Obviously, Maricopa County has the largest, you know, population. They get about for the 2020 election. We'll go with that one for the moment. 2020 election, I think there was roughly about 1.1 or 1.2 million mail-in ballots. Let's talk about how that works. A company in Arizona, not the county recorder, but a company in Arizona called Runback Election Services, which, by the way, is now majority owned by Ben Toma's family. Ben Toma is the Speaker of the Arizona House. His family actually now is the majority owner of Runback Election Services. For years and years and years before they bought out the majority interest, they own a company called Precision Aero, the Toma family. The CFO of Precision Aero is also the CFO of Runback Election Services. So the election service company that services the entirety of election in Maricopa County is directly related to the politicians.
Yep.
To the top politicians in the state. So start off with this bizarre situation. Runback sends out mail-in ballots to anybody who's ever gone on the list wanting a mail-in ballot. So if you've ever requested a mail-in ballot, which you can do online, you can do by doing a form, they send them out. So they send out all the mail-in ballots. When that ballot is filled out, it's put into an envelope. The back of the envelope is signed, and then the envelope is mailed in. When the envelope comes in, what's supposed to happen is it comes into Runback. What's supposed to happen is that a computer system analyzes the handwriting on the ballot envelope against the quote unquote official handwriting of that person. What's the official handwriting? Usually it's the handwriting that would be on your driver's license. So if you have an Arizona driver's license, you sign for that license, and usually that's the handwriting that's used for the comparison. The machine is supposed to then compare that official handwriting with the handwriting on the ballot. That's how this works. First problem, the machine is set to a 10% level, meaning that as long as the handwriting on the back of the ballot envelope matches to a 10% degree of the handwriting of the person's, you know, official handwriting with the motor vehicle division, then that ballot automatically passes.
That's pathetic. That's a pathetic.
If it's well, it gets worse. If it's less than 10%, Then it goes to a second review. It doesn't just get automatically rejected. It goes to a second review. And this time a person looks at it. Problem is a person looks at it on a screen as it flies by.
Yeah.
And when this was measured, this was actually measured by Carrie Lake in her lawsuit.
Yeah, I saw that.
It was found that the amount of time each ballot is looked at averages 1.8 seconds. So the secondary review process is 1.8 seconds of looking at the two signatures before that flies off your screen. To give you an idea of how pathetic this actually works out to, because there's actual numbers for this, California, which has about 9 million mail-in ballots, has a throwout rate of about 1.29%. If you look at other states with comparable systems to Arizona or California, about 1.25% is the average of what you throw out. So 1.25% of the ballots wind up getting thrown out for a problem. Signatures don't match, whatever, get tossed. Arizona only throws out 0.35%. So 1/4 of the ballots that are thrown out in the other states.
So they're passing a lot more likely
They're
false.
passing a lot more ballots that should not be counted.
Yeah.
So basically 4 times the number of ballots that should be counted.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's kind of giving it to you by the numbers. We have a whole chapter there where we run these numbers by you to explain how all this works. But
Okay.
that's essentially how this works. So that's the problem. That's the first problem. So even if you got around voting machine problems and dominion problems and whether voting machines could be manipulated or not manipulated or whatever, you have this problem starting out where they simply pass through ballots. Now, we were able to get a hold of a number of 2020 mail-in ballots. As you know, Maricopa County has refused to allow inspection of their ballots, of the ballots that came in. They flat out refuse. They say it violates the law. You're not allowed to have them. That's insane. Nowhere in the country does that exist. Does that law exist? And probably on its face, it violates the Voting Rights Act because it subjects everybody to fraud and it diminishes your vote. So that probably is the next best lawsuit that should be coming. So that's problem number one, is that you've got, without even going to the machine problems and dominion problems and all these other things, you already have this problem of this, this you can't even verify. You can't even have a third party go in and verify the ballots. We were able to get a hold of probably a couple hundred of the 2020 signature, ballot signatures, and we're able to compare them. And we actually have a page of this in the book, and we have more of this, in the footnotes. We show you that these signatures that were counted do not match in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I think I actually looked at that page today, comparing them.
Yeah, they're absolutely nonsense. They're insane. They in no way match. I don't even know how you get a 10% match. I don't know how you get a 1% match. Making it worse, we've been able to identify in a number of cases who the forger was on the back of the ballot envelope. One person in a lot of these? Several people, but we were able to identify who the forger is. More than that, more than identifying the forger on them, when you line that up with what our investigator saw of the mail-in ballots that were being taken to run back, we have a pretty good idea of even where they came from. We know where they came from. So, I mean, that's how pathetic this situation is with these ballots. And that's, again, before you get to the next problem, not just Dominion and not just what happened on Election Day in 2022, where 30% of the machines failed, you failed to scan. Yeah. But you have another problem, and that's the database. That is, when Runbeck does the counts, the information goes from their computer system into the recorder database system. Except we've already been able to show that the database system is infiltrated. Yes. Meaning that before those numbers are reported, those numbers can be and probably likely have been changed. We have no way to prove the changes occurred because because Maricopa County will not allow the access to be able to look. Just like it won't let you see the ballots it won't let you look at the database to check. But given that we know that the infiltration occurs and documents are falsified for the court system and for the recording system, we have every reason to believe that it goes further into the database system as well for the election counts.
Mm-hmm. So when all of this was compiled and given to Governor Ducey, what happened?
Well, I think a couple of things happened. I don't want to discuss too much of the detail on this because there's more to it than what we've talked about and written. I would say this: Governor Ducey's reaction to it was, somewhat horrified. I don't think Governor Ducey, I don't think anybody who's been in government in Arizona would be horrified to know this is going on. I think the extent of it and the extent to what our investigation was finding, because this was in 2022, I think were very important and showed this to be on such an extent and level that was beyond, I think, the scope of what he imagined we were going to find. What we found is just incredible in terms of the size and scope. That also tends to make it seem less believable. And again, another reason for the book.
Yeah.
But that was a big part of it. I think also, this was in 2022. It was only a couple of months before the election. It seemed very likely that Abe Hamadeh was going to win for Attorney General, and that Kari Lake was going to win for governor, and that through their wins, a lot of this, would get investigated in a way that goes beyond what we could investigate, with subpoenas, with criminal subpoenas, with grand jury investigations, et cetera. And so I think for the most part at the time, I think that what Ducey was counting on was that he didn't have to get his hands dirty in this, but that the next administration would do so and could look at this more thoroughly, could do something that he really wasn't in a position to do, but could have grand juries impaneled through the Attorney General's office and through the counties, and that ultimately this would get investigated in the way in which it needed to. I think that's how he looked at this.
Okay.
He also knew something else too. He knew that we had worked with the FBI. He knew that we had you asked me about this before. He knew that we'd had meetings with the FBI. He knew that we had meetings with other state attorney generals. People don't always understand that state attorney generals do actually talk to each other. You've probably seen that they bring lawsuits together. They sue the federal government together. They do other things. We had meetings at that point, I think, with 6 or 7 attorneys general in other states, where those states actually had taken and have taken action on what we've reported to them. And so one of the things that I think Ducey felt at the time, I don't want to put the words into his mouth, but I think one of the things that he figured at the time was that the collective group of attorneys general would talk to each other. Again, at the time, Mark Brnovich was the attorney general. I think he thought there was going to get a lot of mileage out of that. And then ultimately Abe Hamadeh was going to become the attorney general. And that through the conversations between attorneys general, that there would be a more formal investigation launch between these different groups that would include the state of Arizona, and that would lead to findings, probably more so than even what we came up with, and ultimately, to solutions to the problem.
I see. And how much of this stuff is still being continuously investigated right now that can kind of hold any bearing on changing it?
All of it.
All of it. Okay.
Most of, let me put it this way. We work very well with state AG offices, except for Arizona, of course. There's no issue with my meeting with them, my hanging out with them, my hanging out with the investigators, going over the evidence, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, we do this just fine. And it's usually not just me in the room. One of the things that I did is that one of the things that was originally came out of this is because Jackie Brager made the presentation was that, oh, this must be the John and Jackie show. It must be the two of them doing this. One of the things that I made sure to do is that in this book, I normally don't talk about our staff, the people we work with, because the anonymity matters. Their ability to do the work, matters to being oftentimes being anonymous. So one of the things that I did here, with everybody's permission, is I didn't acknowledge everybody who's on the team, but I acknowledged a number of the team members who didn't have a problem being public. So there's a lot of stuff that gets done behind the scenes that's not just me meeting. When I had a meeting with the FBI, I had another person with me. When I met with the California Attorney General for the first time, I had another person with me. Those meetings actually took place in a law firm, the office of a very major law firm in Los Angeles, where the lawyers from the senior partners of the law firm were in the room as well. So these meetings don't just happen where, I go have lunch with an FBI agent and I say, hey, here's what I'm working on. We have these formal presentation meetings with multiple lawyers in the room, with FBI agents in the room, et cetera, with investigators in the room when we go over this. So it's a lot more of a complex process than what people think. The states do what they can do in the individual states, obviously. When it comes to Arizona, because of the corruption, it requires mostly the federal government and federal agencies to do work. And as much as people are in this day and age very negative on the FBI, very negative on the Justice Department, especially for those people who are very supportive of President Trump, those are not the only agencies. People don't realize that the federal government has a number of investigative agencies. And we know them and we work with them and we use them and they use us, et cetera. So there's a lot of investigation going on that people don't know about. There's a lot of tying things together that people don't know about. It's often said that, you can bust a drug dealer, but the dealer is going to be back the next day. If you bust a supplier, you might have a shot at keeping drugs off the street for a while. I mean, ultimately there'll be another one, but you have a better shot. Simply busting the people who falsify the documents is the least of the problems here. As I said, ultimately, you're really looking at long-term, not as much about people going to jail as you're looking at how do you fix this? How do you make this work? And as I said, Arizonans are going to wake up to the problem of this is a multi-billion-dollar problem that the state doesn't have the money to pay for. So how you do this, how you unravel all of this, how you get all of the tentacles to come out of this, and then how you have the least amount of disruption on the lives of Arizonans is a very important part of this. So I would say to people, I understand the frustration. Believe me, I get frustrated. It was a 4-year investigation. Why doesn't more happen? It will. But these things are not short. They take a long time. Bureaucracy is never quick, no matter how much you want it to be. And unless a building's on fire or just blew up, things are not immediate, and they just never are. That's frustrating, but it is how the system works.
Wow. Well, maybe the cartel can loan us the money we need to fix the problem. I think I got one more question for you, and that is about Yavapai County. How much investigation have you done into Yavapai County or the politicians in that county?
We didn't do a lot, but one of the things we did look at is the Medicaid fraud. The Medicaid fraud, the access lien fraud, runs to Yavapai County as it does to 7 other counties in Arizona. So there's several thousand falsified Medicaid liens. We did look at a number of the politicians, mostly on the state level, coming from Yavapai County, and found similar problems. And we talk about some of that in the book. We found that obviously Yuma, Pima, and Maricopa counties were the ones with the biggest set of problems. At least the ones that are the most effective problems to the state. So Yavapai was certainly not the worst, but Yavapai has its own set of issues, some of which are unique to Yavapai, as you know, and as people who may be watching who are not from Arizona probably would not know, is that really until the 1990s, Arizona didn't have freeways. And when you think about that for a moment, it seems kind of just a funny little quirky thing. But you have to understand that communities in Arizona developed as totally separate rural areas. Mesa was an entirely separate place than, say, Prescott, or separate from Gilbert, or separate from Queen Creek. These were all very separate areas that really ran themselves. They had their own city governments, their own police forces, own fire, own budgets, own taxation, et cetera. So these are all kind of, if you will, states within the state, if you will. And so each one of them has their own unique positives and their own unique negatives. And so, if you want to find corruption, I'm sure I could find it in Yavapai County. But in terms of the bigger picture of how it infects directly into the state, the state level, that's mostly Yuma, Pima, and Maricopa counties.
Right on. Well, Mr. Thaler, thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate it. I know the people listening do. Where can people find your book, buy your book, learn more about you?
The book is available on Amazon. It is available from Barnes & Noble. It is available from Ingram Spark and Lulu, and pretty much now, I think, all of the internet booksellers. I think there isn't any one that it's not on at this point. In addition to that, we also have the book available for sale at a very, very good price on reporttothegovernor.com. Reporttothegovernor.com, one word, one long word. You can find it. And if you buy it from reporttothegovernor.com, I will also sign the book for you.
Awesome.
So,
Awesome.
so not only are you buying it at a pretty good price, you also get it signed and sent by me, and I'll even personalize it if you want me to, et cetera. So they can go to our website. And as I said before, the website isn't just the book, like a picture of the book. The website also has investigation materials on it. It has the footnotes on it. It also has other interviews that I've done where I've talked about these issues, and people can see those as well. It's got a lot of information. So people can go there, and we hope that they do. They certainly will if they get the book, because if they want to see things like the forensic, question document examiner's reports, every word of it, every page of it, they're there. They're there for people to review.
Well, I guess I'll have to buy another copy so I can get your autograph. That's great. Any social medias that you have and operate?
Yeah, in addition to the website, we also run something called projectthaler.org. As a lot of your viewers probably know, I have a personal issue in all of this involving my son McKinley. And so we created a foundation last year, a charitable organization, to help parents of abducted children. And that's whether the child's been abducted by another parent, or whether that child has been abducted or taken wrongfully, by a county or state agency. And so we help parents all over the country recover their kids. We have probably at any one time now about 10 cases or so going, where we're working to recover a child. So we like that very much. That's projectthaler.org. We appreciate everybody's support. Obviously, donations help, but anybody can do anything for us. We're very happy to have people just be supportive of us. I am found on Twitter under Thaler, Thaleresq. Probably most people know that, but you can certainly follow me there. Also, there is a Report to the Governor site on Facebook as well. But for most of the information you're going to get is either going to be from reporttothegovernor.com or from Thaler ESQ on Twitter, or X as it's now called. And so, what we do is I post various things about this. I post, sometimes I'll post a couple of documents that we come across with an explanation as to how this, plays into the racketeering. So people can get a lot of information that way.
Well, thank you so much, sir. I appreciate your time and your work very much. And I'd love to talk to you again in the future as things develop.
Great. Andrew, thank you so much for having me.
All right. Take good care.
Good night.